So in Hebrews, as many of you have known, we've been talking about how the sacrifices of the Old Testament, of the Old Law, of the Levi priesthood, the sacrifices of lambs and so forth, how the author wants to tell us that they now cease and they have been replaced by the one priesthood of Jesus Christ, the one true high priest, and the one true offering, which is his own body and blood, which was made on Good Friday and represented to us every time the Mass is celebrated. That's why as Christians we no longer follow the ritual laws of the Old Testament, because it's all been fulfilled in the New Testament of that in Christ. And now, as we move towards the end of this letter, we're going to hear some more moral exhortations. And beginning in chapter 11, we hear about the virtue of faith. Remember, he's telling this to people who their whole livelihood revolved around those Old Testament sacrifices. A lot of these probably would have been Levi Christians who would have been reading this letter when it was first written, and so their whole lives are shaken, their whole profession and just how they're accustomed to living is turned upside down because of this fact. And so now he has to go into faith and begins with a very excellent definition of faith. The realization, he says, of what is hoped for and evidence of things not seen. And so in the mind and the attitude of this writer of Hebrews, faith is both a future but also a present action. It's a future because it's a look forward towards something good that is coming, but it's also present. Why? Because faith grounds us in this reality that these things are here now. These good things of God are present among us. We just can't see them, So kind of like tie that in with the Mass. It's both a pledge, a look towards the heavenly liturgy that we will fully partake in one day, but it's also here present among us. We just don't see it. It's by faith we believe. We don't see it. We see bread and wine. That's what we see. But faith tells us that there are some things that we don't see. The real presence of Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity. But it's also a look forward towards that full communion with God. But faith also in our practical lives, to go into the gospel quickly, because this is one of the rare instances where, the first reading has its own cycle, the gospel has its own cycle, but today they blend beautifully, right? Because here we have the apostles in the midst of trauma, in the midst of a very scary and frightening situation, as their boat is sinking and as the storm is upon us. Just like in our lives, we can feel like that maybe from time to time our boat is sinking and there's storms revolving around our lives. And the appearance from that is that God is sleeping in the midst of those storms. God is inactive. And we're just calling out to him and just asking for his help in all these things, and nothing seems to happen, but things are happening and we just don't see it yet. We don't see it. We see God sleeping in the boat, but God is still Lord over creation. And it's just that simple little request of the apostles, don't you care? Help us. And then he gets up and rebukes the storm, but then he rebukes them for their lack of faith. They were frightened. They didn't need to be scared. God, though again, in their appearance, it was a man sleeping, but it was God who was in the boat with them. They didn't see it and they didn't recognize it. And look, I'm just talking to myself really here. This is really a homily for myself, to be honest with you, because there are times where I'm just scared and dejected and frustrated, and the storms look big and they look frightening, but God is here, every time I say the Mass. Don't see it. It looks so simple. In the eyes of many people, it looks unthrilling, and bored. Maybe a lot of our young people will say, not these though. These kids are great over here, They're our retreat leaders this year. Very proud of them. Good kids, And but with all that though, the majesty, the presence of the heavenly liturgy is there. It's faith. And so if you struggle with it, ask for it. You can ask for an increase in faith. Actually, I think we should, all of us. We could all use some of it in our lives, especially as those storms get big and scary around us. May God bless you.